Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Emma Bryan and I am the Community Engagement Specialist here at the Filson Historical Society, and we are super excited to have you all joining us this afternoon. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome the curators and an artist that worked on the Women at Work exhibition here at the Filson. And so I'll now turn it over to each of the curators and artists. And Irene, we'll start with you. So introduce yourself, Irene, and tell us your work on this exhibition.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. So I'm a local multimedia artist, and I focus in painting, fiber, and collage. I was asked to create 2 works for this exhibition, and it was based off of a series that I've worked on for several years now. I do hand-knitted portraits using found photographs, primarily of women. And I was asked to create 2 portraits of one of them of Eliza Tevis, who was a formerly enslaved woman who I think came into some money after she was freed, and became sort of a notable businesswoman in Louisville. And the other one is kind of a representation of factory girls that kind of remain nameless and exist kind of only in photographs from the time. And because there wasn't really any historical documentation of Eliza, I think there was only one like charcoal portrait that may or may not have been of her, even though she was this notable woman. I was asked to basically fabricate like an imagined portrait of her, and sort of a representation of factory girls. So I used found photos that the Filson provided me of women from that era, and I used my computer to kind of fuse different portraits of different women together to create a new image of a woman that never existed. And then I knitted those, and we'll have pictures of those portraits later on. But yeah, so it was a pleasure working on that and collaborating on this exhibition.
Great, thank you, Irene. Jana?
Hi, I'm Jana Meyer, and I'm an associate curator of collections here at the Filson. I primarily work with the Filson's manuscript and architecture collections, and I was one of the co-curators on our Women at Work exhibition. And so we're really exploring some of the changes that are occurring in women's work in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so I was involved in the research process and selection of items for display. This was just really a lot of fun and really a pleasure to work on. You just get to learn so much about our collections as you're working and doing the research. And so I also ended up doing a lot of writing for the exhibit. Specifically, I worked on sections where we discuss women's involvement in business. And in this time period, we're really seeing women kind of in a transitional period. So a lot of kind of the domestic work that they had been doing, they're really kind of leveraging that and moving into doing more work kind of in the public sphere. And so 2 places, where I really investigated that, the dressmaking industry. And so women had been doing a lot of sewing in the home. And so a lot of them in this time period become dressmakers and seamstresses. And this is a big area where women are working. We have several dresses by local makers on display in our exhibit. And then another area where I did a bit of research was the restaurant industry. And so women have a lot of experience with cooking from their domestic work. And so a lot of them are becoming restaurant owners and doing confectionery work. And I did a lot of research on a local woman named Jenny Benedict, who owned a restaurant here in town that was very popular. I also did some work on a section where we kind of explore the ways in which women are stepping outside the home and beginning to organize into clubs and working to reform and better their communities. There's a movement called the Women's Club movement that was happening at this time, so I did some research into that as well. And then finally, I did some writing about just how women's legal rights were different at this time period. You know, married women especially had very restricted legal rights, and so that's something that I looked into as well.
Thank you, Jana. Maureen.
Hi, my name is Maureen Lane, and I am the art and artifact curator here at the Filson, and I also coordinate the overall exhibits. So I basically help my colleagues produce these wonderful exhibits and help coordinate the kind of logistical aspects of that. And for Women at Work, I focused on two main areas. The first area was the role of women's education in the 19th century, and really looking at how women moved from an educational process of where they were being taught to make samplers, and their sewing skills are being emphasized, and they're being taught music and painting, but painting as a hobby, kind of these refined skills that would make them a proper lady in society, to the role of really advanced women's education through seminaries, including a local seminary that was here called Science Hill Seminary. And then the role of educating women really changes. So women are now being taught like through the 1830s, through the end of the century, they're increasingly taught more of high math. So calculus and advanced calculus and trigonometry, and then advanced sciences. So women are actually being taught things like astronomy, biology, and even chemistry. So really seeing how education of women develops and grows throughout the 19th century. So that's been a really fascinating aspect of this particular exhibition, and you get a really good view of that. And then the second part is I looked at two female artists in the 19th century. So the first woman, Magdalene Harvey McDowell, she was born in the 1820s, and she was really a society lady. And it was during her lifetime that women didn't really pursue art as a career. They did not get any formal education as artists, and art was considered more of a pastime for a woman of society. But in her mid-career, she really decides that she wants to pursue not only art, but architecture as a career. And this was before there were women architects. So she's really trying to educate herself, make trips to New York, study under other artists, and she's just taking it upon herself to try to become a professional artist. She starts showing her work like in her 40s and 50s, and she also starts selling work and making commissions. And then she's juxtaposed with Patty Thumb. Patty Thumb was born a generation after McDowell was. And for Patty Thumb, she was born right before the Civil War. She was among the first generation of women to be able to study art formally at a formal art program and go to college. And Patty really exhibits her work throughout the entire country. She sells her work commercially. She has a studio, and she really supports herself, or tries to support herself as much as she could as a woman artist in the late 19th, early 20th century. And the two women have very different experiences as artists. And so a fascinating component of the exhibit is seeing how just in one generation, new opportunities open up for women artists.
Thank you, Maureen. Now we are going to go over to Brooks, and she's going to introduce herself, and she's also going to share a short PowerPoint presentation on the physical installation of the Women at Work exhibition. And we'll get to your questions, Kathleen, about the virtual exhibit as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Brooks Vessels. I'm the Museum Collections Assistant here at the Filson, and I also do a lot of work to assist Maureen with the physical installation of our exhibits. Share my screen. So our exhibit is comprised of a variety of materials from a lot of our different areas in our collection. And these items include such things as photographs, letters, books, papers, pamphlets, manuscripts, paintings, drawings, textiles, jewelry, and other museum items. So that's a whole lot of different kind of content that we tried to fit into this exhibit. So we really had to get creative with how we arranged things in the space. While you walk through the exhibit, you'll see that there are large gridded areas where we've arranged books alongside letters and alongside photographs right next to these really large oil paintings to try to just make it a cohesive space while also giving enough room to highlight each individual artifact and give note to like how important each item is. So here are our wonderful curators working to Tetris the exhibit and get everything to fit as best as we could. You'll see here that we have our reproductions, and then we've got like small wall cases, and then these really large oil paintings alongside our textiles. So here is everybody hard at work. One of the most challenging parts of the exhibit was figuring out how to install our collection of garments designed by our local dressmakers. The exhibit highlights the creations of Madame Glover, Madame Grunder, Madame Mulvaney, and Mary Cummings Udy, who all lived and worked in Louisville in the 19th and early 20th centuries. So Jana did all the research on these women, and I worked with her to figure out which dresses we wanted to highlight in person in the exhibit, because we have quite a few from all of the designers in our collection. So each garment has to fit a certain criteria to be able to be put on display. These objects were scheduled to be up for months at a time, so we needed to make sure that each object was strong enough to sustain the exposure to light and to be held on a form for that long. Doesn't seem like it should be that hard, but I think the oldest piece on display is from the 1880s. And so there are a lot of challenges when you're working with installing these antique garments. Many dresses from the 19th and early 20th centuries were treated with a chemical that caused the fabric to shatter and tear as it aged. So we had some really noteworthy pieces in the collection that we really wanted to feature, but considering the way that the textiles aged, it just wasn't possible. So once we figured out which ones were going to be stable enough to put on display, each dress was measured and then put on a form that was custom made to the dress. We have a selection of dress forms in our exhibit supply, but they had to be like custom fit with padding and foam to support the weight of each garment. And because each one was owned by a different woman, they were all very different in size. As you can see here, this dress is actually too small for our dress form. We had to use a handkerchief and a petticoat to cover up the space where the dress didn't fit, which blew my mind a little bit because our dress forms are 19 inches at the waist, and this is at least 3 inches too small. And somebody wore that. Yeah, very, very small dress. So once we got all of them on the forms, we took the time to vacuum them and steam them to try to get out any of the dust or that accumulated before we got the dresses, and then any wrinkles that had formed from being in an archival box for decades at a time. So we usually would put them up on these tables and then take the time to steam them. This dress here by Madame Mulvaney had a really long train with these really cool ruffles at the bottom. And so it took quite a while for us to get all of the wrinkles out of those garments. So once we did that, the dresses were walked over the pedway and down to our exhibit space from our collection storage, and then installed up on our platforms that we had custom made for this exhibit. While we weren't able to include every object in our collection that we felt told the story of women working in the area over the last 100 years, we did our best to really create a cohesive and engaging exhibit.
Thank you, Brooks. We are going to go over to Jenny Cole, and she's going to introduce herself and also give us a tour of the virtual exhibit. And one thing I wanted to point out, Jana Meyer did a Filson Friday talk, virtual Filson Friday talk on all of the dresses in the exhibit, and that's up on our YouTube channel, and we're going to post the link to that in the chat. So if you want to check that out after, you should. Jenny?
Thanks, Emma. And I'm Jenny Cole. I'm the Director of Collections Access at the Filson, which means I manage the reference services and work with the staff on the reference desk. And I know I've worked with some of you out in the chat room with reference questions you've had at the Filson too. So it's really a passion of mine, and it's exciting to get to learn more and dive into the collections through the exhibit work that we do too. I did not play a huge role in this exhibit. You've heard, I think, from everyone else just about the different portions of the exhibit and who researched what. I did want to add that we had another staff member that was a co-curator, Emily Bankin, and Emily went back to school full-time this summer and starting an internship practicum this fall. So she's no longer with us at the Filson, but we want to give her a huge thanks for her role in this exhibit too. And she collaborated with Maureen on some of the educational portions. She looked into Central High School and Lucy Duvall, also Patty Smith Hill and the kindergarten movement. So you saw Emily pictured in some of those pictures, and we thank her. Also like to thank our intern, Caitlin Hogue, who helped with the install, and also a shadower of the day, Marissa Coleman, who came in to learn more about being a curator, who assisted us with install too. So this has really been a great team effort, and I've enjoyed so much working with all of my coworkers and our independent artist, Irene, and also some of our interns and just people who stopped by to work on it. So we're really excited that the physical exhibit is going back up next year, and we're hoping to welcome people virtually in the gallery, but then also hopefully in person. I know we've had a couple of questions about that. So to get back to my role in the exhibit, I have done some previous research for talks given at the Filson. In 2011, we did a Her Story 2-part series on a lot of women in the Filson's collections, some of whom we featured in this exhibit. And I've given other talks on women as well. So some of my previous research was used, and I worked with Jana on the Club Women section as well on this. So what I'm gonna do is share my screen and walk you through our digital exhibit. So here we are at the Filson's website, which is filsonhistorical.org. And you can navigate to the collections page, and on the collections page, navigate to the digital collections. And that takes you to our 2 current digital areas. And the one we're talking about today is called Omeka. So this is the Filson's Omeka page. And we have collections and exhibits on this page. So the default lands you on collections, but we're going to go to exhibits today. We have 2 pages of exhibits right now. And I'm gonna take us down to Women at Work. So what we did to create this digital exhibit, I should not say we, what Emily Bankin previously mentioned, and also Danielle Spalenka, who is our Associate Curator of Digital Projects, what they did to create this exhibit was gather images from all of us, from the install, from time spent in the gallery, digitization work we've done, and pair that with information from our labels and information from our panels that was up on the wall, and basically create a digital walkthrough of the exhibit. So you can see that there are different sections of the exhibit over here on the right, and those are all going through the different sections that Jana and Maureen and Irene and Brooks spoke about in terms of describing what they worked on the exhibit. And there are different ways to navigate through it. You can use just different sections like this to go side to side, or you can click over here in the menu bar. So you can see once you get into a portion of the exhibit, this is about women going to school, and Maureen was talking about researching that part. You can actually see the documents or the items, and you're able to get in a lot closer to where you could really almost even read, for example, this letter. Or you can look at it more in a gallery view, the way you might walk by. So here's the business women. We talk a little bit about sewing, but also then Jenny Benedict, the restaurateur, and of course the dressmakers. So here's a close-up of that dress we saw that didn't quite fit on the stand. And also a picture, I believe, here of the woman who wore it. So that's sort of, oops, and now I'm saving the woman who wore it, beg pardon. Saving it again. Well, I'm not sure what I've done wrong here. I apologize. I'll have to get back into how to do that. But hopefully you can see the actual picture of Bessie Meyer in the graduation gown. I will get on the back end of the site after we're done with this talk and figure that out. So to sort of wrap up what I'm talking about in the intro here, I've gone to the page that shows the work that Irene created for us, and we'll talk more about that, I hope, in the question and answer section. But I just wanted to mention that most of the women we are able to talk about in this exhibit were really women of privilege. They were white women who had access to wealth and thus had access to power. But we really also recognized that there were a lot of women who were doing women's work and who were working for the women's movement that did not have access to power, whose records were not saved, whose photographs were not taken. And we worked with Irene to try to create representations of those to make sure that while we don't want to diminish the important work that was done by the women whose records we hold, we don't want to ignore the women who are not being documented. And we really want to take steps towards finding ways to document them, whether that's through art, as we discussed with Irene's work, or whether through a more calculated approach to do collaborative community collecting, or to just get out and really actively look for these records. So I think I'm finished showing the website now and talking a little bit about what our MO was for creating the exhibit. So I will turn things back over to Emma for the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. So now we are going to move into the question and answer portion of this session. So again, if you have questions, pose those in the chat. That should be on your right-hand side of your screen on your Zoom. So you can type your questions in there and we will get to them as we move along in this session. So the first question that we're going to start out with today is, how did you choose items for this exhibition?
I'm gonna go ahead and start, and I think I'm gonna kind of answer a little bit of a broader question, and then I'm gonna let the people who did more of the hands-on work answer the more specific items question. And I was thinking about it in terms of how we actually picked sort of the topic of the exhibit as well. We've been talking about doing a women's exhibit to honor women's suffrage or women in general for at least 5 or 6 years. I know that we discussed it with some previous co-workers of ours, Jana Ebling, Leanne Weitz, and we really were sort of torn about how to approach it. We want to make sure we're highlighting our collections. We were excited to be able to highlight more of the museum collections with Maureen and Brooks doing the inventory of the textile collection as well. But we didn't want to overlap with what we knew was going on in other exhibits in town too. We wanted to be collaborative with institutions like the Fraser and the Speed and the Conrad Caldwell House, not competitive. So we were looking to our own strengths to really start things off and looking at what stories we could tell well, and we're able to sort of narrow it down to the big themes that you saw in the digital exhibit, such as women in arts, business women, women legal rights, club women, etc., where we really had visual stories to be able to tell. So I think I will turn it over to someone else now to talk a little bit about how items were selected for those specific sections.
I can jump in, Jenny, and sorry, Jana, and then if Jana, you want to follow up. So one of the things that's really compelling about the story of women's suffrage is that women began fighting for suffrage 70 years before they actually won the vote. And it was a really long, hard struggle. And so one of the things that we wanted to focus on was how were the different ways that women were expanding their spheres, and how are they stepping out in new roles? And so that's a big part of why we selected the objects that we selected. So we were looking at stories of women who were kind of bending social norms by either owning property when women generally didn't own property, by being business owners, whether it's Magdalene Harvey McDowell, who was wanting to be an architect before women could even go to school to be architects, and really looking at these compelling stories of women who were fighting in ways other than suffrage, knowing that they didn't have the right to vote and their political rights were kind of restricted, but in many ways they were becoming very involved in their communities, both socially and politically, even though they didn't have the right to vote. And they were really also becoming economically enfranchised as well to gain some independence. And so a lot of the women that are featured and a lot of the objects tell the story of how over a 100-year period, women were slowly taking steps towards suffrage to be more empowered and to prepare them for these leadership roles and moving into a more political and economic sphere.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to what Jenny and Maureen have already said, as we were kind of looking back 100+ years to kind of the time period leading up to suffrage, we really were just seeing that this was a time when women's roles in society were really undergoing a lot of change. Our society was becoming more industrialized and more urbanized. You had a lot more people moving to the cities. And these changes really opened up a lot of opportunities for women to move into other areas of work. And so a lot of the women who we're talking about in this exhibit, they were kind of pioneers in their generation. So they were the first women in their generation to become a lot more actively involved in public life and work and in new ways. As far as selecting specific items for the exhibition, so once we kind of had our general theme and idea that we were going with, we really just did a lot of research. We tried to explore different avenues and just kind of see what we had in the collections that would kind of fit with the theme. And then, once you've done a lot of research, you kind of narrow down to what you think should be highlighted and what you have space for, honestly, too. And so specifically for the dresses in the exhibit, we thought it was important to try and get a representation of some of the women who worked in the industry. And so we did try and choose dresses made by several different local designers. So we have 6 dresses in the exhibit by 4 different local designers. And then as Brooks, I think, mentioned, we also selected items based on the condition. And so ones that would be appropriate to display for an extended period of time.
Great, thank you. We have a question coming in from the chat from Mary, and she asked, what kind of issues or activities did the Women's Club address?
I'll start, but then Jana, you better follow up. Okay. You unmuted too slowly. Thank you for that question, Mary. It's a great one. The Women's Club took on a variety of issues, I think, and they're still, very active today in Louisville as well. I should add, the Women's Club of Louisville is one of our partners in the upcoming walking tour that Emma mentioned. But prior to suffrage, for example, suffrage was one. Women's suffrage was an issue that some of the women's clubs took up. They also took up a lot of what they called, Jana's going to remember the term and I'm going to foul it up, I know, civic housekeeping, where they were looking at health in the city and trying to take care of issues like sewage and trash. There was a lot of work done on tuberculosis issues, I know, as well. And most of my knowledge of it comes from the Louisville Women's City Club, which was one of the groups that I specifically looked into, and a good friend of mine wrote her master's thesis on that. So I've read that, and that's the stuff I know off the top of my head. I know another women's club that we mentioned in the exhibit that I'm interested in is the United Daughters of Friendship, which was a women's branch of a fraternal order. It was for African American women and men, and that group was looking at taking care of its members in terms of sort of they were ill or if there were funerary expenses, and things like that as well. So those are two examples of some of the women's club materials, and I'm going to mute because Jana knows a lot more about this than I do.
Sure. Well, when we're talking about the women's club movement, we're talking about a lot of different women's organizations in the city. And so our exhibit kind of highlights a number of them, the Women's Club of Louisville being one of the organizations here in Louisville. It was founded in 1890 by a woman named Susan Look Avery, who was actually an older woman. I believe she was in her 60s or 70s when she founded the Women's Club. And really, the Women's Club of Louisville did a whole lot of different things. They were involved in some education for their members. And so, a lot of these women were getting together and kind of developing almost their own college seminar kind of courses, and just continued learning in the arts and literature and that sort of thing. They were also very much involved in reform. And so just all sorts of efforts to improve the local community. I think there were a member or two of the Women's Club who were very much involved in establishing the Children's Hospital here in town. And then I know one of the very early initiatives that the Women's Club members did was advocating for chairs for shop girls. And so you had a lot of women who were working in department stores, and they were on their feet for long hours every day. And so the Women's Club of Louisville advocated for chairs for them so they could sit down during the day while they were working.
Great, thank you. We got a question emailed to us from Nancy, and she is asking about some of the artists that are featured in our exhibit, and this is her question. I noticed that Patty Thumb was somewhat a contemporary of sculptor Enid Yandel. They both exhibited at the Columbia Exposition. Did they know each other or ever work together?
I can take that question. So that's a great question. And what's interesting about Patty Thumb and Enid Yandel is they were both definitely in the same social circle. Their families more than likely knew each other and interacted with each other. Both of their families had ties to the Confederacy. They were both kind of the same socioeconomic class. And Patty Thumb was actually about 16 years older than Enid Yandel. And she went to school in Vassar in New York. And then when she graduates, she basically comes back to Louisville, opens an artist studio the first year she's back, and she plants herself here in Louisville. So she does exhibit her work throughout the country. Patty Thumb did travel to New York periodically to study under some of the major artists of her time, including Thomas Eakins. But she more or less stays planted here in Louisville. And Enid, on the other hand, Enid went to school in Cincinnati, and then after she graduated, she worked in Chicago for a couple of years, and then she went to Paris and studied in Paris, and then also worked in Paris. And Jana, you can hop in if there's any other information here. But Enid would go back and forth between Kentucky and Paris, and so while they probably knew each other. They may have met each other. I think they also probably both exhibited at the suffrage benefit exhibit that was here in Louisville. They may have, I don't know if I would say they were friends necessarily or if they collaborated together, but they most certainly knew about each other and had met at some point in their lives here.
While we are talking about artists, we can ask Irene some questions about some contemporary artwork that she is a part of. So Irene, tell us a little bit about what it was like to work on the commissions for this exhibition. What types of sources did you use, and were working on these commissions different than the work that you normally do?
Yeah, so it was kind of a specific sort of challenge that made it much more interesting for me. So the portraits that I made for the exhibition are very similar to work that I had already been making since my BFA show, in which I use a free software called Knit Pro, and it allows me to upload, scan and upload photographs. And it then, if anyone is a knitter, you have to graph it, and it basically turns each pixel of the image into a stitch. And for this exhibition, because we didn't really have photographs of the women that I was making portraits of, I worked with Emily and Jenny and Maureen on finding, like looking at the Filson's image collections of factory workers, and just like other Kentucky women that I then chose some images that worked for me and combined them, as I mentioned before, by sort of like making them transparent and laying them over each other so that it created like a new face. And then I, graphed that out and knitted that. So it was a really interesting process to make a portrait of a person that actually didn't exist to represent people. So yeah, that was super, super interesting.
Thank you, Irene. And Jenny posted in the chat the images of the works that Irene posted for us. They're in our digital exhibit, so you can check those out from the links in the chat that Jenny posted. We have another question in the chat from Stephen, and they ask, were there any significant cases or lobbying efforts to overturn coverture type laws in Kentucky coming out of Louisville? And how early were such laws challenged here?
I can try and tackle that one. So just to introduce coverture and what that is. So coverture law has to do with when a woman married, a lot of her legal rights then were kind of subsumed by her husband. And so they were covered by him. And so, you know, her voice was represented by his vote, by, you know, her property was controlled by him. Her income actually was controlled by her husband. And so he was representing her interests in the public realm. And so kind of in the late 1800s, we start to see challenges to the law. And then actually in 1894 is kind of the Married Women's Property Act here in Kentucky is passed. And that really revises and kind of gives women back a lot of these rights that they lose when they get married. You know, I know some of the local women's clubs, I believe, were kind of involved in challenges to the law and really active in that. I think the Women's Club of Louisville, which we've already talked about a little bit, I believe they were very active. I think actually the Louisville Equal Rights Association which was a precursor to the Louisville Women's Suffrage Association. That was another organization that was really working to overturn some of the coverture established. We actually have the minute book of the Louisville Equal Rights Association here at the Filson. And then I think, you know, women themselves were kind of challenging the law individually even, because we have a number of women in Louisville, and actually one of our dressmakers is one of them, who are going to the courts and who are applying to become femme sole. And so they're petitioning to be given back the rights of a single woman, hence femme sole. And so we're seeing a lot of challenges in the court. Madam Grunder's petition was successful, and so she, I think, petitioned in 1887, so several years before the actual kind of official revision in 1894. And so, you know, a lot of women themselves are actually challenging these laws.
Great. We have a question in the chat from Abby, and she is zooming in from Bellarmine. Hello, Abby. And this is a general question about the Filson's collection policy. And she asked, how do you find items for your collection?
I can start that, and then if anybody wants to jump in, that would be great. So a lot of the items that come to our collection come through donations, largely by individuals or families. A lot of the materials are treasured and preserved and kept by families and handed down from one family member to another. And often when we get them, it's because somebody may be moving or downsizing their home, and they feel that the item has an important connection to here in Kentucky, and they want to keep the items in Kentucky and preserve them. And so we've gotten a lot of really wonderful items just by individuals reaching out to us, and we always welcome those conversations. You can call us or email us at any time, and we love to have conversations with people, and that's a large part of how we build our collection. But we also actively work with different collectors, and we build relationships with collectors in different areas that we want to build the collection in or to fill in gaps. And we also acquire through purchase, and we do have funds that we can use each year to purchase items, and usually the purchases will be used to fill in items that really represent areas that may be underrepresented in our collection, or things that are not the type of thing that would normally be given because they have a market value. An example of that is this summer, we bought a dress off of eBay, and it was a dress made by one of the dressmakers who was featured in the exhibit, and we didn't have very many dresses by her, and it was one of the best we had ever seen, and it was for Mary Cummings, and we hardly ever see them come on the market. And so the dress was actually in Germany, and we were emailing back and forth in email and doing research, and then it was an online purchase. So things come to the collection in a variety of ways.
Great. While we're talking about specific objects, we can move into a fun question. Do you have a favorite object that's featured in the exhibit or even more broadly in our collection?
Well, I can start while everybody else is thinking about that. I think the challenge is that it's hard to pick just one object, because we are really emotionally invested with all of the women that are in the exhibit. And there are so many really fascinating objects. For me, I think like one of the collections that stands out again is for Mary Cummings. It's her collection of jewelry. It's really beautiful. And what's interesting is it's not important just because of its aesthetic, But Mary Cummings was a businesswoman around the turn of the century, like 1914, in the 1920s and 30s. And she was a single mother, and she built her business to support herself and her son. And it was really important to her that she support other women. And so women had various roles in her company. She had a woman business manager for a while. And she would encourage young women who had an interest in design and help them kind of cultivate that interest and give them the opportunity to become designers themselves. So the jewelry is, I believe, was from a young woman who wanted to be an art student, and Mary Cummings convinced her to come work for her company and had her help develop that line of jewelry. And it's just an example of how she was really lifting up and empowering other women to become independent and to develop skill sets that would be useful for their entire lives.
One of the items that really stands out to me in this exhibition is we actually have a sword on display, which, you know, that's just neat to begin with, but it belonged to a woman named Dinnie Thompson, who was a member of a women's group called the Sisters of Mysterious 10. That's a Black women's organization that was founded here in Louisville. And there were actually chapters of the Sisters of Mysterious 10 in a number of different cities. And so in that organization, Dinnie would have been involved in caring for children. They did a lot of work with the juvenile department in the order. They did a lot of work establishing a home for orphans. And then this was also an organization where, you know, just a social support network because, you know, Black women are facing a lot of discrimination at this time. And so this is a group that really supports each other through life and through some, yeah, here actually Jenny's sharing her screen and showing a picture of Dinnie with the sword. And so, the sword itself actually was there was a lot of kind of ceremonial and this would have been used in kind of some of the ceremonial and you know, they actually had some like code books and things too, and so this was really kind of a cohesive group in Louisville.
Great, thanks for that, Jana and Jenny. We are going to share a slide with everyone's contact information. We still have 10 minutes left for question. We're still going to continue to go with question and answer, but Scott is going to share. We have some people on the back end doing things for us, Scott and Kyle and Kate, and they're helping us out with our tech. So this is all the contact information for the curators and Irene, and you can definitely follow up with them if you have questions and things that you want to continue talking about. But yeah, we'll continue to go with questions for the remaining 9 minutes. So Brooks, you have to have a favorite object. You work with the collections every day. Tell us a little bit about maybe a favorite object that you have in the exhibit or in the collection.
Where to start? I have a lot of favorites. My background is mainly in our historic clothing and textile collection. So I think that my favorite piece from that is our dress by Mary Cummings UD, and then our collection of sketches by her. So we have a really extensive collection of her sketches of all of her designs. And it's really cool because she would design them and then each page was double-sided and it would be the same design in different colors. And we actually have a sketch of one of our dresses that's on display. So it was really cool to get to see her original drawing of it and then how it came into fruition. It was also really helpful in putting the dress on the form to know how she wanted it to look. So that's one of them. And then the Madame Mulvaney dress that's white with all the purple detailing on it is just one of my favorite dresses in the collection. That train is about 3 or 4 feet long and it's all wool. So it's like super heavy. And then it has all this beautiful hand embroidery done in silk. And we don't know a ton about Madame Mulvaney, but we can look at the dress and see how important it is just to that time period and also just to exhibit her extraordinary skill as a designer. So I think those are 2 of my favorites.
Great, thank you, Brooks. Yeah, we had a question come through in the chat about a virtual walkthrough of the exhibit. We did have to deinstall the exhibit during this time to protect some of the items. The humidity levels in that gallery weren't great during the summer to keep the items in there. So we did deinstall, but we're going to reinstall in December, and hopefully we can do a walkthrough at that time. We'll keep everyone updated on that. So a question that I wanted to ask you all, I know we have some students in this session, and I was going to ask, do you have any advice for someone who is hoping to be or thinking about becoming a curator or museum professional? Do you have advice for them in their education or things that they can do to have that idea come to fruition?
I'll jump in and start on that one. And I think we have several of the curators on this exhibit, myself and Brooks, I'll speak to specifically, both started off at the Filson as interns. And I came in through an internship via U of L's history department, and Brooks came in through the Commonwealth Center internships that go on. And I think for someone who has an interest in doing work at a historical society or at a library or archive or at a museum, if you're able to do an internship, that's a really good way to know a little bit more hands-on what the work is actually like, because I don't think I would have understood what all of my day-to-day work would be as a person like looking in from the outside, the way that when I really got in and did an internship, I understood more all the different hats that that one wears at any kind of cultural institution. I mean, to be fair, that's most of what my job experience is at cultural institutions. So I'm sure people wear a lot of hats at other workplaces as well. But I definitely think that internships, or even just, I mentioned that I had a student from Bellarmine who was shadowing for a day, even just a shadow for a day, or having some sort of mentor that's active in the profession. I think those are really important steps to take to kind of learn a little bit more about it. And then you have a relationship with someone that's working that way. And then ideally they're giving you some, sort of one-on-one advice for your specific interest too. I will also add, we've had high school student volunteers. There was the Ballard High School History Club came and did some work with us, and one of their students did some volunteer work. And I think we had a student from Kentucky Country Day, Maureen, will you nod if I'm right about that, who came in and did some work with us as well. So it's not just graduate level students or even college level students. We're able to work with a variety of people. And I think other institutions are definitely open to that as well. And something that I feel pretty strongly about here at the Filson is working to make sure that the internships anyway have some sort of payment or benefit. It's not easy for people to work for free, period. So we really want to make sure when we're working with students, and that's students of all ages, to absolutely try to compensate them for their work. So just wanted to mention that too. So I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything. Oh, Brooks unmuted. I'm going to mute.
Yeah, so I just want to follow up on the campaigning for interning. I know that it is hard to intern. Not everywhere is going to offer paid internships. I was lucky enough to get a paid internship or a compensation through the Filson to intern here. And I found that to be a really profoundly helpful experience. Just by the nature of museums, you are only able to see a very small percentage of the collection if you go and see an exhibit or do research. Most of the new building that we had constructed in 2016 is just collection storage. And so that's like hundreds of boxes of beautiful treasures that most people don't get to see. And even though sometimes it can feel a little monotonous to like be going through boxes and boxes of things, you can also find some really incredible pieces. And so you get to see more of like the behind the scenes experience of being in a museum. So it was fun. It felt like Christmas every day, getting to open all these different boxes and figure out what's inside all of them.
Thank you. Yeah, Brooks, I knew you had to have a favorite something. You're working with the collections all the time, so I'm glad we got to that. And yeah, so Sheila asked about our Michael Higgs program coming up. Thank you, Jenny, for getting that in the chat. And I think we're gonna wrap up now at this time. Thank you everyone so much. Thank you, Irene, for joining us, and all the curators as well for answering questions, and for everyone joining us today. We have things on our website that you can check out as we demoed in the beginning, our digital exhibitions. We have many more up on the Omeka site that you can check out during this time that we are a part, and check out our YouTube channel as well. We have a lot of lectures there that you can check out. Jana's lecture there on the dresses of the Women at Work exhibition is there, and check out our virtual live lectures coming up as well. So thank you very much for your time today. And if you want to follow up with the curators, definitely do so by emailing them, and have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Thank you all.